Exile on Main Street is quintessential Stones. For some fans, it's their best album, although Sticky Fingers would give it a good run for its money, as would Let It Bleed. In fairness, with 31 studio albums to their name and a fair few fans across the world, the best Stones album is an argument that could go on forever, to be honest. But hey, let's have a go in the comments below. But part of what makes this one such a classic Stones album is how it was born. It really was the archetype sex, drugs and rock and roll attitude, with all the questionable behaviour that goes along with it. And it doesn't get much more rock and roll than going on exile rather than paying your taxes. So what's all this about, being exiled? Well, at the beginning of the 70s, the Rolling Stones were at a strange point in their career. They were 9 albums deep, and world famous. They'd already released albums like Sticky Fingers and Let It Bleed, to massive success, obviously. They toured the globe endlessly as well. They were the kings of rock and roll at this point. But they were penniless. Now, undoubtedly, this would have something to do with their lifestyle. When you take booze, drugs, and hotel wrecking parties all into account, things aren't exactly cheap. And also, rock stars aren't really known for their budgeting skills, are they? But it wasn't just that, because former manager Alan Klein owned the rights to all their pre-70s material, which was the bulk of their big sellers. You might have heard of Alan Klein before. He was a bit of a music industry boogeyman, known for elevating careers with one hand whilst gouging them with the other. He certainly was that for the Stones as well. They spent years suing him for withholding royalties, misleading them, neglecting to pay their taxes, and so on, generally running their finances into the ground. And at the time of recording Exile, they had just settled a lawsuit with him trying to get the rights to their music back. And taxes were the big issue here. In 1971, a massive tax hike was announced in England. The Stones faced paying 93% tax on all their earnings. At that point, you might as well just make it an even 100%. So what did they do? Well, they legged it. They wrapped up a UK tour and hopped over to France to avoid paying that tax. Keith Richards decided that the perfect place for him to hide out was a 16-bedroom villa in the south of France. Why would he need 16 bedrooms, you ask? Well, this is part of the chaos. The place quickly became the place to be if you wanted to get up to trouble. Richards was surrounded by friends, dealers, musicians, groupies, and all the general sort of shady characters that go along with those things. The villa became a non-stop, drug-fueled party. So, of course, they decided to record their next album there. Because where else? They set up in the villa's basement and immediately ran into problems. It was unsuitable. The damp, mildewy atmosphere played havoc with their instruments. And it would get baking hot in the basement as well, making things even worse. Richards once referred to it as like trying to make a record in the Führer bunker. It was that sort of feeling. Very Germanic down there. Swastikas on the staircase. Upstairs it was fantastic. Like Versailles. But down there, it was Dante's Inferno. As always, they had their famous mobile studio set up outside, and it was a nightmare trying to communicate what was happening in the basement to what was happening in the studio set up outside. Producer Jimmy Miller was constantly running back and forth between the studio and the basement, trying to make sense of things. Bassist Bill Wyman had to set up his bass in one room with his amplifiers out in the hallway. There were cables everywhere. It was madness. Many of the tracks were pieced together in different takes, with lots of overdubbing and stitching together to make it all work. This made a lot of the mixes sound either terrible or brilliant, depending on where you stand. Now, Mick Jagger has since said that he was unhappy with the sound, as he was leaning towards a cleaner, more polished approach at that time. In some of the mixes, you can barely hear his vocals, like at the end of Rocks Off, for example. In fact, a lot of the vocal parts had to be dubbed in later on. That was the general disruption at the villa. Some tracks weren't even finished there, or were just a total mess. Jagger had to record many of his vocal parts at Sunset Sound Studios in Los Angeles. Now, this didn't happen until early in 1972. At the time, Jimmy Miller was not functioning properly. I had to finish the whole record myself, because otherwise there were just these drunks and junkies. But he was in Keith's world, and it was only going one way: gritty, dark, and raw, but also effortlessly cool. Some of the songs penned by Richards really stand out and show where the band were at the time. I'll get a bit more into the individual songs in a second. There was another, more human side to the chaos of this villa. Keith was well into his infamous heroin addiction and lived his life like some sort of druggy ghost pirate. He'd be up all night partying and getting up to various mischief and then sleep all day long. His girlfriend, Anita Pallenberg, was there too. Their codependent relationship with heroin is well known. His bandmates and everyone around him had to learn to adjust to his erratic schedule. Writing and recording sessions would start at odd hours or not at all. Musicians would come and go at will. In fact, one of the hit songs, Tumbling Dice, actually features Mick Taylor on bass and Mick Jagger on rhythm guitar. Also, Mick Jagger got married to his model girlfriend Bianca at the time too. Keith went along with him, serving as best man. The villa, of course, had a week-long party in their absence while they were on honeymoon in Venice. And of course, the revolving cast of groupies, friends, and dealers were there lapping it all up. Now, there's a journalist by the name of Robert Greenfield. He wrote a book about the album, and he pieced it together from a brief time he spent at the villa. The book's subtitle is A Season in Hell with the Rolling Stones, and that tells you a lot. It's worth pointing out, though, that much of what he wrote is rumour, some of which has been corrected or just not proved. But wow, there are some stories in that book. For example, he wrote about Mick Jagger sleeping with Keith Richards' girlfriend, Anita Pallenberg, while Keith was passed out on heroin. This supposedly was a continuation of an affair that had been going on as far back as 1968. But again, it's unclear if that actually happened or not. It's hard to confirm. And then there was the infamous report that Pallenberg encouraged an employee's teenage daughter to try heroin for the first time. This has been debated many times, but if it is true, it's a pretty terrible thing to do. And this is the seedier side of that villa. Amongst all the drugs and decadence and adult behaviour were children. Eventually, the place was raided by French police, who obviously found drugs. They charged Richards and Pallenberg with possession and intention to distribute, which led to Richards being banned from France for 2 years in 1973. All of this, at least for someone like Keith Richards, was a perfect storm to make a Stones album. He's always expressed his love for it, calling it one of their best albums. And he did some great work on it, to be fair. The Jagger-Richards combo has always been a brilliant songwriting powerhouse, but on this album, Richards was in his element, and he took the reins a bit more for this one. A good example is the song Happy, which he wrote while Jagger was away. Keith sang the lead vocals and played guitar and bass on the song. It's really his baby, and went on to become a fan favourite. Keith's country blues fingerprints are all over this album, which is a great thing. And it's amazing to think they were able to produce any half-decent songs at all, but actually they found enough material to produce their first double album. And the title, Exile on Main St, explains itself. Funnily enough, the album didn't do that well upon its release. It wasn't until the late 70s when critics came back to it and lauded it as the masterpiece it was. It's one of the most influential albums from one of the most influential bands of all time. And to think, it all came out of a basement while avoiding the taxman. Aerosmith would have a very similar recording process a few years later with their album, Draw the Line. That album would nearly kill them, metaphorically and literally. And I've actually made a video on that as well. Click over there to watch that one next.